Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about something which might be considered kind of a continuity issue between TNG and Deep Space Nine, and that is the number of ships that Starfleet supposedly had during this time. The problem begins in TNG when the Borg attacked the Federation. It was said that the Federation is gathering a big fleet of 40 starships to try to stop the Borg at Wolf 359, and of course all those ships are destroyed. I think except one ship, I think 39 ships were destroyed. And in the next seasons of TNG, it was constantly being mentioned as a kind of devastating blow to the Federation, which will take them years to recover from. That because of that event, they are unable to confront other enemies. And when Picard wanted to gather a fleet to try to secure the Klingon border between the Romulans and the Klingons, he was told that there are not enough ships in the sector. And later, when trouble began with the Cardassians, an admiral told Picard that Starfleet is not ready for confrontation. So we constantly had these clues that as if all of Starfleet was totally devastated because it lost 40 ships. And of course, just a few years later in Deep Space Nine, we see that Starfleet actually has at least tens of thousands of ships, maybe more, maybe even over 100,000 from what we've seen, because we hear about a dozen different fleets and we see thousands of ships on the screen, and so this is entirely different scales, the different number of ships compared to what we've seen in TNG, in which it was always just a few ships, and that's considered a large force. Now, I kind of blame TNG more than Deep Space Nine because when we talk about galactic powers with hundreds of planets at their disposal and a huge territory, then it doesn't really make sense that they would only have a few dozen ships or even a few hundred. They should be having tens of thousands of ships to make sense if it's a whole galaxy that they're exploring and defending and they have so many threats. So why wouldn't they be building more ships? Especially since they say they have no problem with resources and so on. Picard often bragged in the first season of TNG how there are no material needs anymore, so shouldn't they be able to build as many ships as they want? So shouldn't there be much more ships if there are so many threats all around them? And so I blame TNG more. They should have gave much bigger number of ships, especially if you don't really have to show them, so it's not a matter of saving the special effects. You could simply say, oh, there were 1,000 ships at Wolf 359. That would sound awesome. You don't have to actually show all of that. Maybe they didn't want to make it too unrealistic because, if the Enterprise alone can fight against the Borg cube and survive, then it doesn't make sense that thousands of ships wouldn't be able to. But still, I think they should have made it more epic, at least in the places that they don't have to show. And then it would be a good excuse to explain why was the Enterprise always the only ship in the sector whenever trouble began. Maybe they could wipe out a large part of the fleet early on in that show, and then it would be a good excuse, which they did do, but it doesn't make sense because of the number of 40 ships. Starfleet lost only 40 ships and is totally devastated and is unable to defend itself because of that, and it takes them years to rebuild that. So that always kind of bugged me, this problem. So now I want to try to come up with excuses to try to explain this. Maybe after they started approaching Earth, maybe a lot more ships kept attacking the Borg cube but always retreated as not to get destroyed. So it's possible that a lot more ships got severely damaged and also needed years of repairs later. But they did survive and no one was killed, and so this was never mentioned so much. So it's possible this whole event with the Borg actually took hundreds of ships out of commission for a long while. So it wasn't just the 40 ships which were destroyed. Also, we did see in that episode that as the Borg were approaching Earth, they were basically wiping out all the automatic defenses on the way. And Worf described it as the heart of the defenses of the Federation. And we saw all kinds of vessels approaching the Borg ship and getting destroyed. So even though we saw very little of that, but it's possible that the Borg actually wiped out a whole bunch of defenses, which were all automatic, and so no one was killed. And so again, this wasn't mentioned that much after this. And so it's possible that the Borg actually did wipe out a very significant military infrastructure, all the defenses leading to the Sol system, which were mostly unmanned, and so no one was killed, and so that's why this wasn't really discussed much later. No one viewed it as such a tragedy, because no lives were lost, but it's possible that this left the Sol system very vulnerable later, because all its defenses got wiped out, and maybe again it took years to rebuild all of that, and because of that Starfleet later had to keep a lot more ships all around that sector to defend it from possible attacks by other forces who might try to take advantage of the situation. And because of that, that's what really limited Starfleet operations in other areas. And so that would also help explain why that whole event with the Borg was such a huge loss, that so few ships were available after that. So maybe it had less to do with the 40 starships and more to do with the fact that all their heavy defenses around the Sol system got totally wiped out, and they spent all of it on the Borg, and they have no defenses at all anymore, and so maybe now they have to keep hundreds or even thousands of ships in that sector at all times just to defend it until they rebuild all the automatic defenses. And that leaves the rest of the Federation with much fewer available ships. And another theory I can add to all of this is that maybe up until the Borg attack, the Federation was very overconfident, and so maybe Starfleet sent the majority of their starships on long-range missions to explore distant space, and so most of the fleet was spread to very long distance from the center of the Federation. And maybe a lot of them were so far away that it took them a few years to return to the center of the Federation. And that would also explain why the number of ships jumped up so dramatically by the time of the Dominion War. We can assume that it's because in TNG it was peacetime, and so most of the fleet was simply on long-range missions very far away, and because of the Borg attack and later the Dominion threat, Starfleet began recalling a lot of those ships back, and then by the time of the Dominion War they had something like 100,000 ships available to fight, and that's why we see so many more ships in Deep Space Nine compared to TNG. Another point I want to raise is what happened in the first season of TNG. In the episode Conspiracy, we find out that the Starfleet leadership was taken over by hostile aliens who planned to invade and take over the Federations. And we also had a scene in which Data was analyzing Starfleet movements, and he said that someone is moving things to make it easier to invade the Federation. So a lot of star bases have been evacuated, a lot of personnel and a lot of ships were moved to places they're not supposed to be, all in order to make way for some force to invade the Federation. So I assume those bug creatures were only the first wave, and probably some ships were supposed to arrive into the Federation carrying a lot more bugs probably. Otherwise this whole scene with Data analyzing the fleet movements wouldn't make sense. And so it's possible that those bug creatures that infested all those admirals were deliberately sending a lot of Starfleet ships away, all under the pretense of sending them on exploration missions, but in fact they were clearing the way to invade the Federation. We never found out what their exact invasion plans were, but I assume they were waiting for more members of their species to arrive, maybe on biological ships. I guess that's what I would do. Maybe those bugs were only the first wave, designed to make it easier for them to invade, and they were actually planning to invade with a lot more ships, maybe to infect the entire population of the Federation. And of course it never happened. I guess they changed their plans for the show because it would be too expensive to do all kinds of bug creatures, and so they did the Borg instead. But the initial plan was to have some kind of biological enemy, some kind of insectoid hostile enemy which was planning to invade the Federation. So we don't know exactly when all of this started. One of the admirals told Picard that they've been moving slowly for months, but maybe they took over those bodies even before that, maybe years before. And so it's possible they've been sending ships away from Federation space, clearing the way for an invasion for a very long time, and so it would take maybe years for some of those ships to come back. Other ways those aliens could have weakened Starfleet: maybe they closed down a lot of shipyards, maybe they cancelled the production of new ships, maybe they started decommissioning a lot of existing ships, all under the guise of renewing Starfleet, and the officers would be completely unaware of it, and maybe they all received the desk jobs while a lot of starships were actually being deconstructed, all part of this ploy to weaken the Federation in preparation for an invasion. And so all of this could explain why Starfleet was so weak by the time the Borg arrived. They only could spare 40 ships to defend the core of the Federation. So because a lot of their ships were sent away, a lot of their ships were decommissioned, all the new ship production probably slowed down. So all of this could have caused this weakness, and when the Borg attacked, they destroyed a lot of the automatic defenses in the core of the Federation. So all of this explains why Starfleet was so weak in the following seasons of TNG, and why it was so vulnerable, and it can also be used to explain why the Romulans were planning to invade Vulcan shortly after all of this, maybe because they knew Starfleet is currently very weak, and so this might be their opportunity to try to take over Vulcan. But this is a topic I will leave for my next video, so I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it. If you enjoy my videos, please like, please subscribe. Check out the links in the description to see my other channels and my Patreon link if you wish to support the channel. That would help me produce more videos faster, so I appreciate any support, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.
We only wish to service, Beverly. You will orgasm.
I'm getting out of here.